Hello everyone, it's a beautiful morning for a walk. This is something that I try to do almost every day, and I always carry with me some sort of camera. A couple of years ago I shared with you in one of these videos the camera gear that I bring with me on my daily walks, and that video is still true today. Most of the time I do most of my photography, including my daily walks, with just two zoom lenses, but I also wanted to build a set of prime lenses because I wanted to switch things up every once in a while, to limit myself creatively when it comes to focal length, but also to give me more tools, new tools, like being able to use shallower depth of field. And after a few years, I can say that I finally have a set of lenses that I love bringing with me on a daily basis. And today I wanted to share that trio of prime lenses that I love so much. You might have noticed that the bag is a little bit bigger because it is. This is the 10-liter version of the bag that I showed you a couple years ago. I still have that 6-liter bag that I bring with me when I use those two zoom lenses, but I needed the extra space for the extra lens, and I also have some new stuff in here. I really like these bags, even though they are a little bit expensive, but I know that I'm gonna use them every day and that they are gonna be pretty good. And here they are, the trio of prime lenses that I love so much. You might know two of them already because I've had them for a while. This one here is new, so we'll talk about all of them and why I chose these three focal lengths. Again, keep in mind that the vast majority of my photography is still done with the Tamron 28-200mm lens, and that it took me quite a few years to get here, to get to have this set of prime lenses. So the vast majority of the work that you've seen from me was made before I had these prime lenses. What I mean with this is that the last thing I want is to make you feel like you have to buy these three lenses or any of them to achieve any kind of result. That is not true. Let me introduce you to the three lenses we're going to be talking about today. The first one is the Sigma 20mm 1.4. This is my most recent acquisition just a few months ago. The second one is one that I got last year and that you already know about, is the Sony 35mm 1.4. And the last one is one that I've had for, I don't know, 3 years now, or a little bit less, but anyways, the Rokinon 85mm 1.4. So why these three lenses? Well, I'm going to be talking about each one of them separately, but I think it's the combination of them all paired with a high-resolution camera like the A7Rii II that gives me quite a bit of flexibility for being prime lenses, because I can crop quite a bit, even get to APS-C mode. So for example, the 35mm lens that you can see here can work as a 35 1.4, or in APS-C mode, it can work as a more or less 50mm f2 lens. Following that same logic, these three lenses give me more or less a range from 20mm to 135 when I crop the 85 in APS-C mode. But there's much more than that. You know that I really like to work the scene. When I find something that I really like, I try to find every angle, I try every focal length I can. So this is a very good reminder of the very minimum that I have to do when I find something that I like. I first shoot it from far away, getting a lot of context with the 20mm, then I get a little bit closer, still capturing a little bit of context, but focusing mainly on the subject with the 35, and then I go for the little details with the 85. So they are all great lenses in and of themselves, but they are even better when they are together. They make for a very powerful kit that I love to bring with me. Okay, let's start with my most recent acquisition. That is the Sigma 20mm 1.4. I bought this back in February or March, so just 3-4 months ago before leaving the US. And this is a lens that I never thought I'd buy, to be honest. You see, for the longest time, I didn't have a wide-angle lens, even though I guess this qualifies more as an ultra-wide angle lens. But when I shot the Bronica, when I was shooting film, the widest lens I had was the 50mm. That it was more or less roughly a 26-28mm equivalent in 35. And then when I switched to digital, to the A6000, 24 was the widest for a long time that I was able to go. So for many, many years, I didn't have that option. And that was okay because I found those focal lengths quite challenging. I don't think my photography is minimalist, but I do like when I make simple images free of clutter. Ultra wide angle lenses make that very, very hard because you are including a lot in the frame. So it had to be a very special place, a very special scene, a very clean subject with a very clean background to work, in order to work with one of these lenses. I do have an even wider lens than this one, the Tamron 17-28, but that one I use mostly for video and lives on my A7 IV. So what's changed? Why did I get the 20mm? Well, it's all about the fast aperture, about that 1.4 aperture. It's starting to rain, by the way. And that aperture makes a big difference because when you shoot with wide-angle lenses, the depth of field is by default much greater. So even though you can be shooting at f2 or f2.8, the depth of field is pretty big. Like most of the stuff is going to be always in focus. But at 1.4, I can get a somewhat shallow depth of field, and I believe that it has a very distinctive look. This kind of lenses is not very common. I think this is the only 20mm 1.4 lens in the world for any system. Correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, thanks to the fast aperture, I can play with my subjects in a way that I could not with my previous wide and ultra wide angle lenses. I have to get really close to them, but when I do, I can isolate them from the background and focus all the attention on them so the viewer doesn't get lost. It doesn't always work because sometimes the background is just too busy, and no matter how fast the aperture you use, it's just not going to work. But I used to say that the fog was the poor photographer's bokeh, and I still think that way, but actually fog is much better than having a fast aperture. So if I can choose, I prefer to shoot with an f4, f5.6 lens on a foggy day than using a very fast prime lens on a rather boring day. The results are different, the atmosphere is not the same, you just get better results with better conditions. But this is the next best thing for when we don't have those conditions, like we hadn't here for a long time because these past few days have been very sunny, very clear, very hot, but today that I'm recording the video, of course it had to rain. I think it's stopping already anyway. Anyway, with great power comes great responsibility, and it's very easy to overdo the whole bokeh thing. I like to go for a more subtle effect. One thing that I really like doing with fast apertures, no matter if I'm shooting the 20, the 35, the 85, whatever I have, is to capture a subject that is relatively far away and capture some of the foreground. That foreground is going to be out of focus, but it's going to be gradually getting in focus until we get to the subject. That is a transition that I really like. It's a transition that I really think helps the image, it helps the viewer to know where they should be looking at, and I think it makes the overall image just better. Again, it's just a tiny thing, very, very subtle. And at that point, you might be wondering, so is it worth having that very heavy and very big lens for that very subtle effect? And yeah, it is for me, because I know this is what I do every day, this is what I do for a living, so I think that it's worth it for me at least. The other option for the Sony system was the 20mm 1.8 from Sony. Price-wise was pretty similar. I think they are the same price, but the other lens is half the weight and half the size. So for a while I was thinking about going with that one, but I'm very happy that I went with this, with the 1.4, because otherwise I know that I'd be wondering if the 1.4 would make any difference when I'm taking photos or not. And I know that after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever, I was going to buy this one. So I just decided to go for it right now and avoid those problems in the future. It's a beautiful lens and I use it very often, more often than I thought I was going to, and I even use it for video. Okay, next one is the Sony 35mm 1.4. This is a focal length that I love because it's not too wide, it's not too narrow like a 50 would be, and this lens at 1.4 is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I got this one a year ago, just before my trip to Norway. I bought it for that trip, basically. It is my most expensive lens by far. I thought about getting this lens for a long time because, you know, I'm very, very small. I'm a very small photographer and my budget is very tight. So an expense like this one is a big, big one. And I'm not like a wedding photographer or a real estate photographer or someone who has very specific needs. I don't really need any lens. I just capture what I see and what I like. I don't have to, you know, meet any requirements from anyone else. So I don't really need any of the equipment that I have because I didn't need this lens. It was really hard to justify buying it. I don't like owning expensive gear because you can lose it, you can break it. I like to use it in bad conditions as well, and I'd be having second and third thoughts about exposing expensive gear to rain, snow, cold, the heat. But the thing is that I missed my old Samyang 35mm 1.4 quite a bit. That was a very heavy, very big lens. It was bigger and heavier than the Sigma 20mm, but I missed it. I missed the images that I was able to make with that lens. But as you might know, that lens stopped working after around a year of use, and I was doing some research online, and it looks like the issue was it's a pretty common one with that lens. Since then, Samyang released the Mark II, but it looks pretty much the same. It's just a slightly different design, but it looks pretty much the same optics and mechanics and everything. My options were, well, I can go with that lens again because it's cheaper, even though it's a little bit heavier and bigger. But what if it fails again? Do I buy it again? I keep buying Samyang lenses until, I don't know, the end of days? Or should I go with the Sony, this one that is a much more expensive lens, but it's also much lighter, much smaller, and the performance should be even better than the other one? And that was my thought process here. I didn't want to buy another Samyang 35 that would break on me again. And that is the excuse that I came up with to justify the purchase of this very expensive lens. But anyway, now that I have it, I love it. I absolutely love this lens, and I've made some beautiful images that would not be possible to make with my zoom lenses. The better low light performance of shooting at 1.4 of course has helped, has come in handy a few times, but what I like the most is about that very unique look that you can get when you shoot at wide angle, because this is still a wide angle lens when you shoot them at 1.4. There are a couple of images of a cat that I made here during one of my daily walks, and one of a horse in the Lofoten Islands that use that shallow, very shallow depth of field, and that I believe work because of that. But most of the time, again, it comes down to that very subtle effect of having some elements of the frame slightly out of focus while the subject is totally in focus. It's not for everyone because a landscape photographer usually wants to have everything in focus. I don't think the same way. I have a different approach to photography, and this lens fits the bill pretty well. Let's move on to the last lens of the trio. It's also the oldest one of the three. Is this Rokinon 85 1.4. I've had this lens for 2.5 years, maybe a little bit more, and I really, really like it. This used to be my favorite focal length when I shot with the Bronica. Back then, in medium format terms, that was the 150mm f4 lens, and I made one of my favorite images ever with that lens, the last of winter. As you can see in that image, this focal length allows you to extract the essence of a scene. You don't see the top of the trees, but all the attention goes to the interplay in between the trunks of the trees and the contrast with the white ground. Now, being a longer lens, the 1.4 is almost overkill because it can actually blur the background out way too much. That is not something I necessarily want to do, so I find myself shooting this lens very often at f2 or even f2.8. So if I were ever to replace this lens because this one breaks, or if I lose it or something happens to this lens, I might go with 85 1.8 instead because of the the size, much smaller, much lighter, and also the price, much cheaper. What I like about this lens is that it's very, very simple. It has a focus ring and nothing else, and I really like that. Compare it to the 20 millimeters and you'll see the big difference. This one has buttons and switches everywhere. I personally don't use them, so they are kind of useless and they are just another breaking point, another point of failure, and they make the lens more expensive. For example, the aperture ring. The reason I don't like it is because I don't use it. I'm always shooting wide open with these lenses. That is the reason why I have them. And if I want to change the aperture, I can do it much easier. I can see it in camera, in my viewfinder or the screen, so I don't have to be double guessing or looking at the lens to see my aperture. But at least this Sigma lens has a lock switch here, so the aperture ring doesn't move. You see, you have to switch that to actually change the aperture, which is a great feature. But what it does is basically removing that feature from that lens, one that I didn't need. The Sony lens does not have that option. It is harder, it's stiffer, it gets stiffer to get it out of automatic mode, of automatic aperture like it is right now. But it does happen too often, in my opinion. And many times I take the camera or the lens out of the bag and I try to shoot something really quick, and I don't know why I'm stuck at f16 or f11. I cannot figure out how to change it until I realize, oh God, the lens is set at f16 and I have to get it back to auto. So that's, to me, in my opinion, very annoying and something that I actually paid for. So I wish, I know I'm being a little bit selfish here because I don't use these features, and some of you might find them useful, which is totally fine. Another feature that I don't like is the custom button here, because they are not standard. Like, some lenses have them, some lenses don't. Some lenses have two, some lenses have one, some lenses have it on the right, some lenses have it on the left. And to me, that is a huge downside to the custom button, because I want using my camera feel like second nature to me. At any moment I know what to do with this camera. I know how to change the exposure, I know how to change the aperture, I know how to do 99% of the things that I need in the field very fast and very quick, because I'm used to the controls, I'm used to the settings that I have here. If I add something that depends on the lens that I'm using, then I'm making things more complicated and I'm gonna have to think a little bit harder, a little bit longer. The same goes with the aperture, by the way. If some of my lenses have it and some of my lenses don't, then to me it's kind of pointless, because again, I become aware of my camera, I become aware of my gear instead of focusing on what I should be focusing on. I really like my camera, my lens, all the equipment that I use to disappear and let me work on what matters the most, that is capturing the composition and the image that I want to capture. I hope this makes sense. Again, this is just my personal use and my very own perspective on camera gear. You might differ, and that is totally fine. You might love the aperture rings, and that is totally fine. I'm just sharing my perspective and my thoughts here. Feel free to share yours down below. Anyway, this is all I had to say about this trio of prime lenses that I love bringing with me on a daily basis, on my daily walks. And I love the flexibility that they give me to switch things up from shooting just with the zoom lenses, the creative limitations that they set on me when it comes to focal lengths, because yeah, most of the time I bring the three of them, but sometimes I just go out with with the camera and the 35, for example. So you can combine them in every way you want, of course. And at the same time, I appreciate that new tool, that creative tool that I have with the shallower depth of field and being able to shoot in darker conditions and I still get a very decent photograph. I'm gonna keep going now and hopefully make some images in this beautiful morning. Tomorrow it's supposed to rain, so hopefully I'll be able to go somewhere and make some images, because again, I've been kind of sick of staying at home with that very sunny and very hot weather that we've been having. So we are getting a break tomorrow. Hopefully I can make a video about it. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.